Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. Today, James and I are going to talk about ending campaigns and shelving campaigns, the things that lead to those, and some prep work you as a GM can do to make them as satisfying for you as a person and for the sake of the story and characters. Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game. We wanted to talk about endings.
Yes.
Bringing a campaign to an end. I had spoken about this. I've talked with this. I'd rather talk with this. Hello, I don't talk with this with anybody. I think Chris and I might have done an episode at least that touched on some of this a while back, but I don't remember for sure. But I know that there's open terrain, and I think it's one of those things that's worth being deliberate about, and therefore worth thinking about and talking about. And I'm really interested in knowing your experiences with. Because primarily your experiences with are from a player perspective, whereas mine are typically from the other side of the figurative screen.
The only shelving I've done has been with one shot, so completely different experience. Though we have multiple of us done like multiple one shots where you're using the same characters but in different things. But yeah, I've never had to shelve a campaign or even an extended venture beyond High and Dry. It would be the closest thing. So
see, I don't consider not going back to a one shot shelving. You played a one shot. Like if the intention was to play a one shot and you're done with it, well then the unexpected thing would be to go back. Yeah, do we need to define anything? Now that we've drawn a limit by saying it doesn't apply to one shots.
I think there is an importance to define the difference between ending and shelving.
Yeah.
Which I think we have covered in our campaign episode. We talked about that a little bit,
yeah.
But I do think it's important for this to note that ending a campaign means it's done. You're never coming back for sure. Shelving means we're going to put this aside, but there's a possibility we'll come back to it. But it's at a point where if we never come back, that can be an end of a story.
Yeah, I'll say ending, for the sake of this discussion, ending a campaign is, you have no intention or there is virtually no or no likelihood of you ever coming back to it. Whereas shelving, at least there is an intention to. And I'll differentiate. I'll even say there's an intention to, not just an openness to. Like, hey, well, let's put this on the shelf for a while, some period of time. Whereas ending is like, okay, we're done. That's nice.
Which that's fair. The Curse of Strahd campaign that I've been in and has been shelved for like a year. The intention has always been to go back and do the final session, but it hasn't happened yet. But the intention's always been that. So I think that is a fair difference to point out.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's talk about some of the basic reasons for. Because I think that you could have similar reasons or the same reasons for both, ending or shelving. Let's talk about some of the basic reasons for, and then we can talk about, and tell me what you think about this, then we can move on to talking about how to do it well, either of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it, because define the terms, explain what you're actually doing with it, why, and then going on to here's an example.
Yeah,
so I think that's great.
So, I mean, obviously, I think let's go with the most rock bottom, boneheaded, easy reason for shelving or ending. And I would say, or I'll say that's some real world stuff gets in the way, and either the GM is not available any longer, or enough of the players are not available to play, and you say, well, half my group moved out of town, or, my job transferred me across the country and the whole time zone thing doesn't work, so it's over. Or, I had this experience when I was running Pathfinder Kingmaker a billion years ago that one of the players, his work schedule changed and he was not able to be part of the group for a couple of months. So if I remember correctly, we shelved it, we put it aside with the intention of coming back to it, or the hope. And then when his schedule changed, we're like, rock on, and we went right back to it. Yeah, so that's a really obvious one. Real world stuff gets in the way and prevents the group from continuing as they are. What do you think another boneheaded reason or most obvious reason?
I am going to hit the literally most obvious of you've completed what you plan to do with the campaign. Like either you finished the book because it was a campaign book,
Yeah.
or the GM had like, this is my start point. This is where I kind of like, this is the big bad you're going to fight or whatever the ending was. And it's like, oh, we hit that point.
We did it.
Yeah, we did the thing. So I think that's also like very clear. Most campaigns that I have played don't end that way.
Most don't.
Yeah, they almost never end that way, but that is a legitimate like, hey, we have hit an end, or like this is as far as we planned out. We're gonna shelve this. Like maybe we come back to these characters. Maybe we have an intention to come back to these characters but we hit the point
Yeah.
that we had planned out, and now we're done.
Which is what I did with Curse of Strahd. We played through the whole thing. We that is, we played. We didn't play through every single thing in the book, but we played through our Curse of Strahd interpretation, using the book, going where and doing what the players wanted to, and then we ended it. And yeah, I think you're right that those kinds of things are rare. I think they're probably more rare with a homebrewed GM created adventure campaign or whatever, as opposed to a book. At least you can wave the book around and say, we only have just so much to go. And people kind of grab onto it. Okay. So we got two reasons. People move, or people, real world stuff gets in the way of the actual group coming together. The campaign comes to its natural story conclusion. I'll say the other one is that people, they're not happy with it. They're dissatisfied or burned out. I'll lump all of those together, call it a lack of energy to continue going. And that can come from players, and that obviously can come from the GM. If you're just not enjoying, and a little bit of advice, GMs, you're supposed to be enjoying yourself too. You are not there as a slave to your players, nor are your players there as like organ grinder monkeys to entertain you. Everybody should be enjoying themselves. And if a long time goes and you as the GM are not satisfied with the campaign you're running, it is fair to bring that up with your players, and maybe even broach the subject of sunsetting the thing, ending it, or shelving it, because you're just not getting out of it what you want to. But I think that's a big one too. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think those are the three main ones that I've experienced as I've played. I can't think of anything else like as a reason, since those are all kind of the three main categories.
You know what I'll do? I'll take the dissatisfaction or lack of energy, and I'll put the other side to that coin. And I see this one all the time, and unfortunately, I think I have done this. I'm certain I have. Is the new shiny, or the shiny new thing. You're happy with your D&D campaign, and then a movie comes out and everyone's like, yee, Dune, woo, yee. They're all excited about Dune, or everyone's excited about Star Wars, or something like that. And then there's this itch to go scratch the new thing. And so those are, either you're not satisfied with, you're not happy with the energy in the current campaign, or there is the perception that there's something new and shiny that will be more energetic and more fun. But I'll lump that in. I think that's probably it.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point out, like, in my experience, and you can disagree with me on this because you've had different experiences with it, but for me, whenever people become dissatisfied or the new thing comes out or like that, I'd say 75% of the time that leads to a shelved campaign, like with the intention of coming back to it, in my experience. And only about 25% of the time, everyone's like, no, we're just done with this. Like, we don't want to come back, because almost never are we dissatisfied with the story. It's more like we're just tired and want to try something else, or the new thing comes out. On the other side of things, I think when we've hit a natural like conclusion, whether the end of a book or the GM's like planning, we've hit the big bad and done the thing, 75% of the time, that is the end of the campaign.
Hmm.
Like there's no going back to it. It's the middle one that's interesting. It's the one where people move or schedules change or there's a deadline coming up where I've found that to be the most 50-50 between ending and shelving,
Sure.
because people's schedules can change back, or someone moves but then hey, like someone just decided they're going to set up a Zoom thing or whatever, or a
Or you
new
find
player's
another
willing.
player.
Exactly.
And the
That
other
one.
players, there's energy there. They want to continue it, and then you got to figure out, maybe that's a shot in the arm that provides you, some more, as I said, energy to continue the campaign. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point that out in my experience, because I think when people are hitting those different points, that's something to think about. Like, hey, you might be brand new, all of your friends are brand new to the game. I've never had a situation like this. Well, is it okay to say, let's shelve this? Because I really do want to come back, but I'm just tired. In my experience, limited experience, yes, that's the best time to do it. If you finish Curse of Strahd, chances are you're not going to come back to those players. You're going to
Right.
want to do something, or those characters. You're going to want to do something else. So just to put that out there, it's not always the case. None of these are exactly what's going to happen for every group, but in my experience of the campaigns that I've done, that's where those
Yeah.
end up.
Yeah, I think also one of the things that I'll add this on the energy, like flagging energy or perception of a new shiny thing. Sometimes that can be system too. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had actually just this was after we had played Castles and Crusades, and the group, there were some folks in the group who were kind of like, "Oh, I'm all right." Like I had one player who was like, "Yeah, this is pretty cool. I like it," but he's like kind of happy-go-lucky about most everything. I had another player who was like, "Okay, I found this to be interesting." I had one that was like, take it or leave it, maybe a little more on the leave it side, and one who really hated it. And so we just decided after a while, like this is just not like I always felt like I was swimming upstream. So we moved to something else. We moved to Night's Black Agents, and I like the idea of the gumshoe system, and I think that the gumshoe system is probably it's probably much better for like Trail of Cthulhu, which is investigation heavy and comparatively lighter on action, whereas Night's Black Agents is supposed to be a balance of the two in the mode of like the thriller movie, like the Bourne Identity and stuff like that. And I really don't think it works. So we played one. We started out and played one adventure in using those rules, and like this is just not like none of us. We like the world, we like the story, but it's just like it just felt like we were constantly swimming upstream. So then what I did is I used one of the versions. I translated the stuff we had into one of the versions of the World of Darkness D10 based system, and that didn't feel right either. It just didn't. It just did not work. And so sometimes you do have that. You do have like it's the story. People are just not interested in the characters. They're not interested in setting. Sometimes that the air comes out of the balloon because the group is just like we're just not really digging this, So then you can like transform or whatever. So where can we take this? Because it's the ending or shelving gracefully that I think is challenging. Now, put aside situations where like the GM's moving in a month, then you're just figuring out a way to like wrap the thing up. Putting aside that, or we could come back to that. How do you go about doing these things gracefully? What do you think?
So I think we should start with ending.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a little bit easier and people have done it more often or are expecting to do it more
Most
often.
often not well
yeah.
in my experience, and I'm part of that.
But that's where, in my experience, the 3 campaigns that I've done that have ended like with an actual ending with a purpose.
Not
I
just
think,
stopped.
right, exactly. Each one of them, I think, have been done differently. I think some of them have been done better than others, but the one for me, just as an example, that went really well was the very first campaign I ever played, and it's probably the main reason why I've continued to play TTRPGs. Was a 2-year campaign with friends in college, which anyone who started gaming or has gamed in college knows it's an entirely different experience than any other gaming that you'll ever do because people have free time and are all stuck in the same place in order to do that. But when we did that, my GM did a really good job of the final session or the lead up to the final sessions. It was about a 2-month period that we led up to this final, like, we're going to have this big ending. He did a really good job of making there be a very big focus on each of our characters. So when we got to that point, like, we felt like we had done as players what we set out to do in the campaign. Not even like, oh, we beat the big bad, because that's what everyone thinks. Oh, you beat the big bad, end of campaign, it's done. But like, oh, like my character was actually consequential in the world. And that was where a lot of us were like, okay, we've now done our thing. We just need to do the last session to finish this. So we have the nice like bookend for the story, but we were all completed even if it had just ended there. And then of course the last session was like 6 hours and so much fun, and we had a great time finishing the actual like fighting the big bad. But that was the thing I think that made that experience the best, was that each player felt individually fulfilled, which was a lot of work for the GM. But I think he enjoyed it because after 2 years of a campaign where we played each semester and with a break in the summer, it was really the perfect way for him to like, I'm going to put a bow on the top of this thing that now anytime I go somewhere and talk about gaming, I have this 2-year campaign that I'm like, and I did it great from the start and everyone loved the ending, but it was a great experience as a player. And I think as a GM, that was a good way to handle it.
I think we can tease out a couple of really important and useful bits of advice and things to think about from this. When you're going to bring it to an end, maybe people get fired up at some point in the future and go, hey, let's blow the dust off those characters. But that is not on your mind at all. You are finishing Curse of Strahd. You are finishing Rime of the Frost Maiden. You are finishing Pathfinder Kingmaker Book 6. You are finishing the thing. And for the GM, I think that you brought up something really important, where if you want to do it well, you can't just bring it to a resolution. You can't just bring the story to a resolution. And in published campaigns, that's what the book aims to do, because the book doesn't know what characters people made or what side stories they've developed or anything like that. But if you want to do it well, you, the GM, do have to put in the work to make sure that there's something in those final sessions, plural, last few sessions, that point to some resolution and some cool endings for the characters within that campaign. I think that's a really, really good point. And that doesn't mean like navel-gazing, pandering type crap. It just means that, like, when we wrapped up Pathfinder Kingmaker, one of the characters, we actually, after we finished the thing, then we talked about, okay, this is what happens over the few years afterward. And we decided that like the one, they had been all like, it was kind of goofy, but they were all joint kings. They were all like co-kings. And what happened was all of them, except for one, decided to abdicate and endorse the one as the king, and his line would be the royal line. So it's like, okay, that's a cool, and there were like really badass and cool things that happened in the last sessions and stuff. But it was like, and then one of the characters, the sorcerer, was like, I'm going to establish like a magic academy that'll be like the center of arcane learning in this new kingdom and stuff. So it was like we made sure that there was space narratively to put a bow on each of the characters as well as the story. And that does take work from the GM, but it also takes effort and some input and feedback from players. Like to be aware, like, oh yeah, hey, the thing's coming to an end. You as a player, hey GM, what can I do to help contribute to a cool ending for, like, Flim Flam or whatever my character's name is, or something like that. So yeah, I think that's a great way to help bring it to a really positive, memorable end.
And with that, like, and you said this, you don't need to make it navel gazing and just like a session per player to make sure that it ends up. You don't need to do that, because more often than not, players throughout the campaign build relationships with one another through their characters. So to give one example, like one guy that I had never known before we started playing D&D, and then with this campaign became great friends both in real life but also in the story. And it was hilarious because like my character, like his whole thing was, I want to earn a noble title, just because that was, he was a soldier, that was his whole like thing, what he wanted to do. Well, the other guy, his character had always been like kind of the secret like assassin type, and he's like, well, I'm my job is to just keep him alive and protect him through the story. Was not the way that it started out, but at the end it made it really easy to take those two characters and kind of like, okay, I don't need to do a session where it's just one of you doing your thing that you've always wanted. Well, no, like these two characters are probably going to end up working together going forward. So it worked really well that we set that up to happen. And those two characters, okay, cool, GM, we've established what's going to happen with these two. They're going to also help the other people end up where they want to go. So you don't have to sit there and be like, what will I do for every individual player to make them special? They'll figure that out themselves, and you'll be able to kind of build that into your story and how that works.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, that goes to the the cooperative nature of this, that the GM has got work to do in this if you want to end it well, and the players do as well. I do think that this kind of, you're reaching, we're reaching because we want it to end well. Every book that you read, you want it to end well. Like I recently, a couple of days ago, I finished yet another military science fiction. 2025 has been the year of the military sci-fi book for me. And the ending of this one was really dumb. I was one of these. I'm like, really? Come on, dude. Oh, really? That's what you're. No, it was supposed to be like the big reveal, and it fell so flat. It was so lame. We don't want that in our games. We want really cool. And but it does take effort. There is some serendipity. Sometimes things just happen. They click in the session. We all know that. But maximizing the likelihood of that happening is going to require some prep. So yeah, figuring out ways to resolve the story well, and I think that's the obvious one, then making sure that the characters, especially in a long-running campaign, they check those boxes or get those feels for the thing that they imagined their character reaching at the end of this. What are some other things that that you think, at least, looking at ending a campaign, being deliberate about it, that you think would be useful to do?
So, one of the most interesting things I was involved with this was I came in at the very last minute of a campaign to play kind of just a character that a friend wanted me to play. But it was a Blaze of Glory campaign, which was awesome. And I have never considered like doing or being able to like do as a like GM. Like it just wasn't, I've never considered it until I did this with a friend of mine. And it was essentially like, oh, the way that this campaign has played out, they're never going to finish this successfully. The goal is to do the job, and probably every single player is going to end up dead. And like every character. And they're like,
Right, that's
okay.
better than every player dead.
Yeah, correct. But like they knew that going in, and it was the first time I'd ever been in a room with players who were like, "Oh, I don't care if my character dies. This is going to be awesome. They're going to go out exactly the way." And I was like, "This is completely the opposite of anything I've ever done." And it was so much fun because they had played the character, like they'd played the characters to be that way. And this friend who is the GM, he's slightly more hardcore than the GMs that I had played with. So I was like, oh, like these people are power gaming because their GM would kill them if they weren't. So their characters are over the top. But in the end, it ended up being a really cool situation where actually no one survived the final session, and he had done the work to like explain why that mattered, because they did complete their quest, quote unquote, even though none of the characters escaped alive. It actually ended up being another really good way to do it, and I'm just like, I think that's a different way of shelving a campaign than everyone gets the happy ending. There's also the none of the characters get a happy ending, but it's a great story anyways. And that could be, and that's a great way to shelve a campaign, because then you can, or to end a campaign, because you can't be tempted to come back to it because everyone's dead. So
That's a great point. I'm gonna tease out of that the idea that as GM, you can do things when you are ending a campaign without fear. You can do things that you would not otherwise do early or mid campaign, or even like near the final act. Like you want all the characters who are present to make it to the final scene or two or three. But I think you're right. You know, the idea of, okay, you die, she dies, everybody dies. Like that can be cool. I mean, look, I think that the ending of Rogue One was absolutely classic. Not only and I'm not talking about the final scene. I'm talking about when what's her face, whose name I forgot,
Jyn Erso
blew up.
Yep.
You know, when Blue Squadron blew up, you know, it's like that was so badass. It established so much that made episode 4 even better. Forget about the perfect articulation between the two episodes. That was butter. But that ending, you know, can you imagine ending a campaign like that? That would be awesome. That would be the campaign you would remember for the rest of your life. It would be like the greatest book you'd read. So yeah, you as GM can do things and present things, and especially in that final session or two, present risks that you never would in the campaign. And so you might as well drive it like you stole it at this point. You might as well, you know, reach for it and go for it, because you are ending it. So yeah, I think that's a way to go about it. And that again takes some in a longer running campaign. I think that would be easier because you'd have more plot threads to putter with, and you would hopefully know your players and their characters better, so you can decide like what would be extra cool for such and such the barbarian in this. You know, how can I wrap things up and make it really great? Yeah, ending is tough because it's really challenging, but it offers terrific opportunities when you can be deliberate about it. You know, it can be challenging sometimes, shelving or ending, when you have like a split among your players. Like some would like to continue playing. Now, obviously, if you are finishing a published campaign, you're like, well, we're done with it. You know, that makes it easier if you're done with it too as GM and you want to move on to something else and you don't see room for those characters again. That's an easier sell. But like, you know, if you, the GM, have your campaign that you've written yourself and you're like, okay, this is naturally coming to an end. You got some players who like they want to keep playing. That's something we can talk about otherwise, because that's like the politics of it all. But yeah, I think that's is there anything else we want to talk about or add with ending? So I think we don't have to overcomplicate it.
Yeah, I can't think of anything, because ending is one of those things that I think you as a player or a GM know is coming. Like you see it on the horizon and then you're just prepping for when it happens.
Yeah.
So that's where like my first campaign I was talking about, everyone knew it was going to end because one of the guys was graduating from college and one of the other guys was going on to his master's degree. Like he'd still be around, but it's a completely different experience. We're like, this just isn't something that we can do anymore with this group of people. So it just made more sense. Like, well, we're losing 2 of 5. Let's just end this and then do something else that's more flexible. And it worked perfectly. But that's usually it's something you see coming. It's not a surprise, like to actually end a campaign. So I think that's probably, at least in my opinion, I can't think of anything else to add there.
Yeah, I don't think we need to overcomplicate it. So yeah, we got a couple of good pieces here. So what about shelving. And I'll say this. I'll start this off because I've done this a ton of times. And the vast majority of times that I have shelved a campaign is when I am burned out on it as GM. And I might be, and I'll just lump under the heading of burned out, like I'm tired of the system, or I'm tired of the world, or I feel like I've emptied the bucket of story that I had for that at that point, and the bucket it's empty. I'm just like, I just don't have anything more for this. And so the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. I would like to move to something else. And that can be difficult sometimes because some players will want to continue and some will not. And some will be ambivalent, or they'll be like, oh yeah, that's not a problem. We'll show, oh, will we come back to it at some point? Well, maybe, maybe. But what are the reasons?
So I've only ever been involved in 2 campaigns that have been successfully shelved, and by that means they've been shelved and then people have come back to them. There have
Okay.
been a lot
I
that
like
been,
that. Wait a minute. I like
yeah,
that as a definition. So shelving it, yes. Shelving it is ending it until you bring it back. So successfully,
correct.
real live, but you can shelve it with the intention of bringing it back. The question then is, do you ever bring it back? I have, and I have not.
Yeah,
Tell me what you're thinking.
I would say we in all of the groups I've played with 2 or 3 different groups pretty consistently. Of all of them, of the 10 we've shelved, only 2 of them have ever successfully been returned to with the same group of players to complete it. There's one that's hanging in. If this Curse of Strahd campaign does actually end in the new year, that would be the 3rd successful one and my 4th successful ended campaign. But um, yeah, shelving is a really weird space because, like you said, you always intend to come back to it, but you might or might not. In my experience, the ones that really, like, if you shelve a campaign and you come back to it, it's ones that have a really strong story and the group of players, barring crazy circumstances, will still be around when you plan to come back to it. So to give an example, the easiest campaign, we've actually managed to shelve it twice successfully and then come back to it, is my solo D&D campaign that I'm playing with someone. It's just the one GM and I, and we've shelved it for a few months
No,
for another thing. Yeah,
So do you mean you didn't just like pause it and you didn't play at all? You shelved it and you played something else with and then brought it back.
correct.
Okay.
So the very first time we ever did it, we paused it just to like take a break, like over Christmas break, because he's from Tennessee and I'm from here in Ohio. So we're like, well, we're not going to see each other for a month. We're just going to pause. But no, we did shelve it at one point to actually play a different D&D campaign. Paused it and then came back. And now the second time, I guess I shouldn't say we've successfully done it yet, but we've paused it for us to play Traveler. And then we have a plan come mid-February, early March at the latest, that will go back to D&D because he's like, okay, I really enjoy the Traveler, but I want to flip back to D&D because I have caught up with writing to the point where I really want to do this stuff. And I'm like, well, I really want to play that, and that'll give me time to write more Traveler to come back to that later. So we've gotten to a point where we can kind of go back and forth. But that one, we already have a schedule planned. Like, we know it's going to be minimum 4 more sessions of Traveler, and then we can pick up D&D and go from there as soon as we feel like it. And I find that that's been really simple because there's only 2 of us. So scheduling is easy, sure. Picking it back up. The other campaign that was shelved and successfully gone back to, it was a little different because it was a mainly online form of playing. So it was all people that knew each other from college, but because of graduation had to go online. And we shelved that to play something else for a little bit, then came back to the original campaign. And then that petered out eventually, like most games do because of life circumstances. But we did play it for a few months, put it on pause to play something else for a few months, and then came back to it for a few months. And then got to a point where we're like, all of our life circumstances have changed. We'll just do a session to kind of make it to where we're happy and then stop. So, yeah, exactly.
I think the tough thing with shelving is that, like, if you, it would be very easy, like you said, a break. Like maybe people,
right.
are going to be, the holidays come around. I don't even think that is shelving it. That's just pausing it. Like
Right.
no one has any intention of the group playing something else. So I'm going to define that shelving is like you're moving on to a different game, with that same group. But yeah, the politics of it can be difficult if there's not consensus, and groups can fracture over that. But it's, I think what I've done, I've gotten better about this. In years past, like many years ago, there were times where I felt like I as GM had to, like it was my responsibility to make sure everyone was having fun at the expense of me enjoying myself. I didn't recognize the balance that was necessary. And when you're not thinking about those things and you're enjoying yourself, proceed to not think about them and keep enjoying yourself. But when you stop enjoying yourself and it becomes kind of a grind, but you feel like you need to keep doing, that's when I would be in these situations where I'm just tired of running this. There were like habits and norms that had come into place in the group, or the story just was not working the way that I had anticipated. And not like I have this plot and I expect the player characters to behave in a certain way. It just wasn't. It's like sometimes you read a book and it's not what you eat. You order a meal and it's just not what you thought it was going to be. But if you have the opportunity, or if you have the desire to shelve something, to move to something else, I mean, obviously all the same sorts of things apply as for ending. But I think that what you've got to do is take into account that I think the default is you pause. That is, like, whatever's going on in the story, you bring it to a chapter end or an episode end. That's ideal. You do not want to shelve a game in the middle of some kind of like plot development. You want to end the chapter or end the book, figuratively. And yeah, you could do so with a bang. Like you can blow up the Death Star, and then Luke and Chewie, or no, Chewie doesn't get crap. Chewie just stands there. And that's why he's howling. Luke and Han get their medals, and the movie's over. Star Wars gets shelved for a couple of years, and then we come back to Star Wars. I do think that resolving the current action and tension, and maybe some character arcs, makes sense. I think also what's nice about shelving as an opportunity is that you don't have to, when you bring it back, you don't have to pick up exactly where you left off. I mean, there's obviously time between A New Hope and Empire and Jedi. There's space between those movies. And so you can do things with that. Like people can remake their characters. People could bring in a whole new character. You could say, in a level-based game, everyone add 2 levels. And here's this narrative that took place in the in-between space, in the 17 months between when we left off, blah, 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 blah. You can make sense of story stuff that, in a way, I think actually is easier to, for me at least, like narratively, is easier to stomach when there's a real break, instead of, hey, when we come back next week, it's a year from now in the game. If you actually took 3 or 4 or 5 months off, I think it's actually easier to stomach. So shelving a game, you might want to consider being deliberate about shelving a game, not because you're tired of it or a new shiny thing came up, but because you write, like you said, or what your GM and your one-on-ones, like, I have stuff I need to write, and I've now expended all of that, and I need a break from it. So let's play something else that, you know how it is when you first start playing a game, it tends, at least for me, it tends to be easier because it's new and exciting. Or you start off in like a level-based game or even a skill-based game, and the characters are all weaker, and so the challenges are easier to build. So I find it's a lot easier for me. Okay, so here's a real example, and then I'll shut up. We've been playing Star Trek here since late July, early August, okay? I have come to the conclusion with Star Trek Adventures that while it is a good game for me, it is best for me to run Star Trek for a few months and deliberately stop. Star Trek has there's a relatively narrow lane that Star Trek feels right in, very Starfleety kind of feel to things. It's like everyone is either neutral good or lawful good. Maybe there's a chaotic good person sprinkled in it, but overall there's a certain vibe. And and for me, it's like I need to run like a season and then take a couple months off from it. And then the nice thing is, like, we're going to shelve this campaign here probably in the next like 4 or 5 sessions. My goal is to do it before Christmas, just because mentally that's a good break. And then we'll have a few weeks off, then we'll start something else. And I know that some of the players they're all enjoying it. And they would like to continue it, but I'll say, look, we'll come back to it in the summer or something like that. And then that gives me time to, like, on bike rides or runs, think of new Star Trek adventures as a side, exercise. So it's not only like I shelve things now, not only out of like, I'm kind of tired of this for now, or hey, I want to do this other thing, but like, I actually think it would be best for this campaign to not continue running it right now. And we will come back to it.
Most of the shelving that I've done is been because one player has been GM and they're getting tired, and another player wants to be GM. I am in a very unusual situation that I am the last player in our group to have started GMing, and everyone wants to GM and no one wants to play. So it's a really weird situation where I'm like, I'm trying to get
so weird. Like, you guys, if you lived in a more populated area, you could like rent yourselves out as GMs, because GMs are the bottleneck, or
that's
lack
what
of
we
GMs.
have. I've tried to get them to go like play at the shop that we have in town, and no one wants to do it because why? We all, like, a bunch of us have places where we can just hang out and play together. But it's like, that if we did that once or twice and other people like overheard what we were playing and especially saw different people running it, we could have like 5 different games going on and then all come together to write like together to help each other with ideas, and then go out. We'd still do our things together with just us, but we could go out and do more with other people. And they're like, but it is a very interesting situation. But that's actually been one of the big benefits, is games get shelved because someone else goes, hey, I have this really cool idea I want to try out and see what you all think. And they give kind of the 5-minute pitch, and everyone goes, oh, that sounds really fun.
It's a great problem to have.
Yeah, let's do
that.
That
It is a
for
rare
like 3
and
months.
great problem to have.
And like, I'm experiencing it now with Traveler from the other end, which is really funny because I feel like we haven't done much Traveler and it's been so much fun. But since it's a completely different like style of game, completely different system, everyone's like, oh, that's a really cool idea. I can run something like that this way, and this thing that I play. And we, for the most part, are starting to get people that play different systems. So like with me running Traveler, and another guy's really like, he really runs 5e, but there are different like things that are popping out that I think that it's going to be a lot easier for me, because I wanted to try to get people to play 2D20, but it was too close to 5th edition, but like different enough that they're like, this is weird, I don't like it, because it feels the same.
Yeah.
But it's not the same, and they're like, why? Whereas now that I've done Traveler, it's like, okay, you've made this jump, we could go do something else. Right. And that's where it's like, but we've had this really weird thing where it's like, okay, the reason we're shelving a campaign is, one, the GM's getting kind of tired. They've been planning everything for months on end, and they're like, okay, I need a break. But someone else comes up and goes, I'll run it. And they're like, okay, cool, you do that while I take a break and think more. Right. And more often than not, that person who's running the original campaign comes up with a new idea, and then we're running a new campaign instead of going back to the one we started. But no one's ever upset, because we're trying all these different like new cool things. So no one's ever angry about it. Just means there's a lot of books on the shelf.
Right. You have a lot of loose ends that you might come back to. Yeah, I think that I think the biggest difference between, forget about the causes of, but the biggest difference, obviously, between ending and shelving is that there are considerations about character and story and setting that you don't have to make. You don't have to make when you're ending it, but shelving it, you need to leave things there. But it is not satisfying, and sometimes life always gets a vote. Sometimes its vote overrides everybody else's. But it is not satisfying to just stop the game and then put it on the shelf. You want to wrap it up. Like with the Star Trek Adventures, and I'm not going to go into detail because I know that at least one of my players listens, which is nice, but I can't tip, my hand here. There's been I started off with just kind of episodic Star Trek-y sorts of stories. And then we moved to, like, I started trying to sprinkle through these episodic stories, bits and bobs of a meta plot that was going on. And then over time, more and more of the sessions have focused attention on the meta plot. So now the meta plot is taken over. That is the focus now. And so what I need to do is I need to resolve that. And I have an idea as to how I'm going to do it. And I have an idea as to like what kinds of things I'm going to throw at the players and like how much potential like destruction or disruption will like I would be prepared to throw at them based on my sense of like, well, what happens afterward when we come back to it? And my sense is that I would like for them to have the ship that they're on and some of the, the other crew that I've put on that ship. But if some of them get offed, that's okay. But I think that maintaining the ship, and then there are a couple of other things in the setting, the campaign setting that I want to keep, but most of it's negotiable. So I need to come up with, 4 or 5 sessions that will resolve this story so that we can feel good about the end of the season. The season doesn't end in a cliffhanger. I don't want to do that. I want to end it like kind of, if I remember correctly, I think Next Generation season 1, is that when they like zapped the guy who had the bug inside him and he blew up in the seat and it was really gross and all that stuff?
I don't remember what season that was.
But
off the top of my
I
head.
know that there were some Next Generation seasons that ended in a cliffhanger. There were all the Star Trek series had some that ended in a cliffhanger and started up with their part 2 as the first episode of the next season. I don't want to do that. I want to end the season, and maybe there'll be some like implications or indications that there's something else or whatever, what else lies out there, but that the main story that they're dealing with, this meta plot with these extra dimensional aliens, that will by and large be done, if not completely done. And then we can cleanly put the thing on a shelf because there's nothing hanging off of it that the players want to tug at. We've satisfactorily brought it to an end, or brought it to a resolution, and then we're done.
And that's what I think another thing, and this is for shelving campaigns, or if we talked a little bit about breaks, or if you're going to take a break, try to do that. But also, if you can, end it on something exciting that people will remember. That way, when you come back, whether that's a few months of playing something else, or who knows, it might be even longer, but you come back and you're like, oh, I remember what happened here because something really like specific or cool or different happened that people haven't experienced, which I know can be difficult depending on the players and how long they've been playing and how long you've been like running this campaign. You're like, oh my gosh, I just need to get to a point where I can break. But more often than not, if the story ends in a way that it's really memorable for players before it's shelved, it's really easy to get back because you're like, okay, so we ended here, and they're like, oh my gosh, I remember that. Now, are we going to do this? And that can be like, hey, we finished this section, and they're like, okay, now the world's my oyster, but we have a direction because of the way we ended. That can just be really helpful for those types of situations.
I think that's really important. So listeners, take note of that. When you shelve something, end it with energy. When people left the theaters after watching episode 4, A New Hope, they were jazzed and they were excited because there was the great exciting climax, and then there was the outro of, your heroes get recognized and everybody feels good about themselves, and when Empire ended, it ends on a down note, but a driven down note. Like there is resolution to the story, but there's something big enough, cool enough, satisfying enough happened that when you blow the dust off of it, it's not hard to get people jazzed to go back to it. Even if people have said, hey, yeah, let's go back to that. When you sit down around the table for the first session, when you've taken the thing off the shelf, pointing back to and maybe providing, a summary of, asking your players to kick in with their memory of it, it's going to be a lot easier if it ends on a bang than if it just is like, well, blah, blah, blah. It like petered out and the session ended. So that is a burden. It's a responsibility and a challenge for the GM that when you finish the thing to shelve it, you do need to have something with some kind of a bang,
Well, and using those two movies as examples, both of them leave with endings that make you go, what happens next? And that's one of the things. It's like, yeah, even though we're shelving it, even though there's a break, like you see the medal ceremony and you're like, okay, they just did this really important thing. They got their medals.
Right.
What happens next?
We know that Darth Vader went spinning off into space. So, but there's a difference though between they completely resolve the story. It's not like it's not like which I don't remember which Next Generation season, the one that ends with Locutus of Borg, and then it starts the next season. You're going, oh crap, Jean-Luc Picard is now a Borg, and he's like, whatever, and you have to wait several months for that. That I'm not talking about. I don't think you should shelve a campaign with a cliffhanger. Give a cliffhanger at the end of a week, the end of a session. Give a cliffhanger if you're going to take a break for Christmas and be off for a couple of weeks. Don't shelve it with a cliffhanger. Resolve it with that, I wonder what happens next, or some kind of fingers pointed forward to say there's cool stuff in the offing in the future when we come back to this, so that there's like a ready reserve of energy to bring the thing back to the table when you want to. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and cliffhangers are really good short term because you remember all the details and you're really focused, but you can only stay really focused on all the details for so long. If you end on a cliffhanger and you go months, people are going to go, no. I remember that there was a cliffhanger, but I don't remember what the cliffhanger was. Right. If you go a month, people will probably still remember. With the ending we're talking about, it's like, oh no, I remember like that specific little detail. But then once people start explaining, it's like it all starts coming back, but you ended with energy and people remember that feeling they had.
Yeah.
And feelings last longer than generally short-term memories.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. I think that does it. There are ideally you end a campaign because you choose to and everyone's on board or on board enough. You shelve a campaign for good reasons and people are on board and on board enough. But if you take some care and are a little bit deliberate and a little bit thoughtful as GM and player, you can do both of them successfully. And in the latter case, maximize the likelihood of it coming back, of you bringing it back and doing so with ease and having people like pick up relatively and be excited about, there was this thing that we were excited about that we had fun with, and now we're going to have more excitement and fun with it. If you end it, if you bring it to a close in the right way, but that just takes some planning.
Absolutely, and that's what it takes, planning, and it also takes an understanding between you and your players. I would never do either without mentioning like, hey, we're going to end or we're going to shelve, which isn't. Not everyone does, but just throwing that out there, like that is important. But if there's enough planning and enough preparation, I think both of them work great.
Yep. All right. So now you've got some ideas. You have a very, you have a rare and wonderful problem in your oddball group of everyone wants to GM. And I've got to work on these next. It's 4. If I'm gonna shelve this thing, bring it to a close before Christmas, I have 4 sessions to work with, and that's it. So I gotta put the effort in.
Oh, 4 sessions is the perfect amount of time.
I think so. Thank you as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.